Chapter 1. Cell 5. The first thing Julia Ross noticed when she entered the prison block was the smell, sour, metallic, and somehow damp, like rusted steel left out in the rain too long. She was escorted by a female officer whose boots echoed against the cold concrete, each step a dull hammer into Julia's nerves. Her wrists ached from the handcuffs, and her thoughts were fogged over by two words that now defined her entire life: double homicide. They stopped outside cell 5. "Take a breath," the officer said gruffly. "This is where you'll be sleeping for the foreseeable future. Don't start trouble, and trouble won't find you." The gate groaned as it opened. Julia stepped inside. It took her less than a second to feel the eyes. A dozen of them. Female inmates lounged on bunks or crouched by buckets of water. They paused, watching her, like wolves noting the arrival of a limping deer. Some whispered, some laughed, a few just stared. The cell leader, a woman named Hannah, stood slowly from her bunk on the top tier. Lean and wiry, face lined with faded scars and a permanent sneer, she descended the metal stairs like a queen inspecting a peasant. "Well, well, fresh meat," she said, crossing her arms. "Name?" "Julia Ross," Julia answered quietly. "What did you do?" Silence. Julia didn't reply. Hannah stepped closer, tilting her head. "What, too good to talk to us?" Another inmate snorted. "She's probably one of those spoiled rich bitches who thought the world owed her something." Julia inhaled, steady and low. "I killed 2 people." The room fell still. Hannah's eyes narrowed. "Who?" "My stepmother. And a doctor." That sparked murmurs, and some inmates whistled low. Hannah grinned. "Damn, princess, you got bite." Without warning, she leaned closer. "But in here, no one gives a shit what you did out there. Just remember that." Julia met her eyes. "I don't care what anyone gives a shit about." Laughter broke the tension. Hannah shrugged and pointed at the empty bunk between 2 women. "Your bottom bed. Your neighbors are Linda. Don't steal her snacks. And Casey, don't touch her radio." Julia nodded, dropped her small prison-issued bag onto the bed, and sat. Somewhere behind her, someone muttered, "She's not gonna last a week." Chapter 2. The scar beneath. The night came in layers, the metallic click of locks, the final call of the guards, the slow, suffocating silence that wrapped around cell 5 like plastic wrap around a corpse. Julia Ross lay on her bunk, arms folded over her chest, eyes wide open. She hadn't blinked in what felt like hours. Sleep was not an option. Above her, the springs of the top bunk creaked every so often, Casey rolling over in her sleep, mumbling in half-dreamed memories. The woman to her right, Linda, was whispering something in Spanish to a crumpled photo in her hands. On the far end of the cell, Hannah and her clique snored softly, like predators digesting the day. Julia turned her face toward the wall. Her fingers traced the faint scratch marks on the paint. 1, 2, 3, 4, and across. Over and over again. Days, weeks, months. Someone had been here long enough to turn loneliness into a tally. Then came the voice. "You're not sleeping because it's guilt," a whisper from the top bunk. Julia didn't respond. "It keeps you up, huh?" Casey's voice was soft but sharp. "Your chest gets tight. You feel it in your teeth." A pause. Then, "I know that kind of guilt." Julia sat up slowly, facing the woman above her. Casey leaned over the edge, her blonde hair a tangled mess, eyes rimmed red like someone who hadn't slept in years. "You ever tell anyone what really happened?" Another pause. "No." Casey smiled faintly. "You will." The next day. The yard was soaked in gray. Inmates wandered like shadows between the high concrete walls under a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or not. Julia kept to herself, sitting on a bench near the fence. From across the yard, Hannah watched her. She wasn't amused. Later, in the lunch line, Julia reached for a tray when someone bumped into her. Hard. The tray clattered to the floor. "Oops," sneered a girl with a serpent tattoo curling around her neck. Julia looked down, then bent to pick it up. Before she could stand, a kick landed in her side, swift, calculated. The world dimmed for a second. Another kick, then another, until, enough! It was Casey. She grabbed the attacker's arm, twisted it hard enough for a sickening crack, then shoved the girl backward into a guard's line of sight. Alarms blared. Guards descended. Blood dripped from Julia's lip. She didn't feel it. Later, in the infirmary, a bandage was pressed to her temple. Cold antiseptic stung her ribs. "You should report it," said the nurse, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes. "No point," Julia muttered. As the nurse left, the door creaked open. A man entered. Medium height, dark blazer, a scar along his jaw, and eyes that didn't blink like they should have. "Julia Ross?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm Dr. Ethan Vaughn. I'm here for your mandatory psychological evaluation." She stared at him. His voice was calm, measured. "We can do this easy. Or not." Julia crossed her arms. Ethan pulled out a chair. "Saturday." Then, silence. "I read your file," he said eventually. "But files lie." Julia raised an eyebrow. "They say you killed a man who was trying to help your daughter, and a woman who raised you." Her lips twitched. "Is that what they say?" He met her eyes. "I want to know what you say." Chapter 3. The Doctor's Notebook. The room they gave for the psych sessions was barely more than a storage closet. 4 whitewashed walls, a metal table bolted to the ground, and 2 cold chairs facing each other like adversaries in a duel. Julia Ross sat quietly, shackles on her wrists and ankles, her back straight, unmoving. Ethan Vaughn entered with a folder under his arm and a small leather-bound notebook tucked in his coat pocket. He didn't wear a badge today, nor a tie. Just a plain shirt rolled to the elbows and the kind of frown that spoke more of personal war than professional detachment. He sat, clicked his pen, and opened the file. No words for a while. Then, "How old is your daughter?" Julia's eyes flickered. "Her name's Olivia, right?" Still no response. "You were 22 when you had her," he continued, voice low and even. "Unmarried, working 2 jobs, living in a rented room above a fish market." Finally, Julia's jaw tightened. He tapped his pen against the folder. "What was the last thing she said to you?" Silence. Ethan scribbled a note, then paused. "You don't have to talk about the killings. Not yet. But you're going to have to talk about something, Julia, or this file's going to write your story for you." Still silence. So he changed tactic. "This morning, a girl named Amanda tried to stomp your ribs in." Julia glanced up. A bruise bloomed along her cheekbone. Ethan nodded toward the mark. "You let them do that to you because you think you deserve it." Julia looked away. "You think what you did to that doctor and your stepmother was unforgivable. But you're wrong." This time her voice was a whisper. "You don't know anything about what I did." "You're right," he said calmly. "That's why I'm here." He slid a notebook across the table. It stopped just short of her fingers. "What's this?" "A place for you to speak without being spoken to. Write in it, or don't. I'll read it before our sessions. It's easier for some people." Julia stared at the notebook for a long while. Then she reached out, slowly, like it might bite, and pulled it to her side of the table. That night, Cell 5. Back in her bunk, with the lights dimmed and the cell quiet, Julia flipped open the notebook. The first page was blank. Her pen hovered. Then, after a deep breath, she began to write. Day 1. He asked me what Olivia's last words to me were. I can't remember. That's the worst part. Chapter 4. The girl in the drawing. The next morning, Julia was called out of cell 5 earlier than usual. The others were still half asleep, muttering curses about the cold, about the guards, about life. She walked in silence through gray hallways, the cold floor biting at her heels through worn prison slippers. "Back to the shrink," muttered a passing guard. But Julia didn't mind. Somehow, the sterile white walls of the therapy room had become less suffocating than the voices behind bars. Dr. Ethan Vaughn was already there when she arrived. No notebook this time. Just a single sheet of paper and a set of colored pencils laid neatly on the table. Julia raised an eyebrow. "What is this? Art therapy for criminals?" "No," Ethan said. "This is an exercise in memory." He pushed the paper toward her. "I want you to draw her." Julia blinked. "Who?" "Your daughter, Olivia." The name caught in her throat like a fishbone. Sharp, unexpected. "I haven't drawn anything in years. Doesn't matter what it looks like. Just show me how you see her." She hesitated, then reached slowly for a blue pencil. One stroke, then another. Her hands trembled at first, rusty, uncertain, but the memory guided her. She drew the roundness of Olivia's cheeks, the soft curls of her hair, the polka dots on her little dress. Her eyes wide and almond-shaped, her tiny fingers always sticky with jam. The drawing wasn't perfect, crude, even childish, but it was real. Julia didn't realize she was crying until Ethan slid a tissue across the table. "I forgot her nose turned up at the tip," she whispered. Ethan didn't interrupt. She used to hum to herself when she was falling asleep. Always the same melody. I never figured out what it was. Julia stared at the drawing. A fragile sketch, but more alive than anything she'd touched in months. I remember once she asked me why the sky was blue. I told her it was because blue was the color of her eyes. Silence stretched between them, not awkward but sacred. Then Ethan said quietly, "Why haven't you told anyone about what happened the night she got sick?" Julia looked away. "Because if I say it out loud, it becomes real." "It was real either way, Julia." She clenched her jaw, the old wall of steel returning. But Ethan didn't press. He slid the drawing toward her. "Take it back to your cell. Keep her close." Julia stood to leave, hesitating at the door. "She asked me once if monsters were real," she said, barely above a whisper. I told her no. A beat. I lied. Chapter 5. The day the rain didn't stop. It was raining the night Olivia got sick, not the soft kind of rain that kissed the windows and whispered lullabies. No, it was relentless, angry, the kind that battered rooftops like war drums and turned alleyways into rivers. Julia remembered because she hadn't slept since. She wrote it down in her notebook the night before, long after the others had fallen asleep in cell 5. It started with a cough. Just a cough. And I told her we'd go to the clinic in the morning. I didn't know we wouldn't make it to morning. Flashback. 5 years ago. The apartment was small, barely held together by layers of paint and cheap plaster. Olivia slept on the couch wrapped in her favorite blanket, the one with cartoon bunnies and tiny carrot patterns. Julia paced the floor with her phone pressed to her ear, calling every public hospital within 10 miles. "She's burning up," she whispered into the line. "Please. I don't have insurance, but she needs help." Most hung up. One told her to bring Olivia in and wait. Minimum 6 hours. But the child's breathing had turned shallow. In desperation, Julia scooped Olivia into her arms and ran, through the rain, down 4 flights of stairs, into the night. The hospital lights were blinding. Everything after that blurred. Someone yelling. Paperwork. A nurse taking Olivia from her arms. A cold bench in the hallway. A vending machine humming beside her, useless. Then, a man, late 30s, a white coat half soaked from the rain, gentle eyes, tired smile. I'm Dr. Dorian. Your daughter's stable now, but she has a serious infection. We caught it in time. Julia could have collapsed from relief. She didn't know then that his name would one day be carved into a courtroom record under victim number. 2 inches. Back to present. Ethan looked up from the notebook Julia handed him. I read your entry. She sat still, arms folded across her chest. You said Dr. Dorian saved your daughter's life. He did. So why? I didn't kill him because I wanted to, Julia snapped, her voice sharp like broken glass. He got involved. Too involved. Ethan frowned. Involved with what? But Julia only shook her head. Her hands were trembling. She tucked them under her arms. I'm not ready to talk about that part. Ethan scribbled something in his notes, then paused. You've carried this alone for too long. Julia let out a bitter laugh. No one wants to carry it with me. Maybe I do. Her eyes met his, just for a second, before she looked away again. Outside, the sky had turned gray, and rain began to hit the window like fingers tapping to be let in. Chapter 6. Confession. The room was still. The kind of stillness that preceded storms, not outside, but inside people. Julia sat with her arms crossed, but her fingers tapped nervously against her elbows. She'd been summoned again to the therapist's room, but something about this morning was different. The guards didn't speak. The walk was quieter. And when she entered, Ethan Vaughn was already waiting, not with a file, but with a single page and a voice recorder. Before we start, he said, you should know the court has expedited your case. Julia blinked. What does that mean? It means, he said gently, if there's something you want to say, now's the time. A long silence passed, then she reached for the page. A voice recorded in time. The audio began with a faint exhale, shaky, uncertain. Then Julia's voice filled the room, hushed but crystal clear. My name is Julia Ross. I'm 30 years old. I'm a mother. Or I was. 5 years ago, my daughter got sick. A doctor named Dorian saved her life. He was kind, gentle. At first, I thought he was just doing his job. But then he started visiting, even when Olivia wasn't in the hospital. He brought her gifts, asked personal questions. He said he wanted to help me find stability. He offered money, childcare, rent. At first I said no, but I was tired, so tired, and he was the only one who ever offered anything without shouting. He told me he loved children. Then one night, I came home early. Olivia was in bed, crying. He was in her room. The words dropped like iron into water. Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. Julia continued. I didn't think. I didn't scream. I grabbed the scissors from the kitchen and I stabbed him. He bled out on the living room floor. I didn't even call the police. I sat there all night, holding Olivia. I kept hearing her ask me, Mommy, are monsters real? And I realized I had told her they weren't, that I had lied. A week later, my stepmother showed up. She heard about what happened. She threatened to take Olivia, said she'd call the police herself if I didn't get clean. She was never going to protect my daughter. She wanted leverage, power. She always did. So I did it again. I didn't plan to. I just broke. Back in the present, Julia sat still, eyes glistening. She had spoken the truth aloud for the first time. Ethan turned off the recorder. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. You're not a monster, he said softly. Julia laughed bitterly. Tell that to the judge. You didn't kill for pleasure. You killed for protection. No one's going to care about that. I care, Ethan said. Julia looked at him, really looked. For once her eyes didn't dodge. She whispered, "It doesn't matter what you believe. It matters to me." And then, almost imperceptibly, Julia nodded. The storm inside her had cracked. The truth had spilled out. And for the first time in years, she could finally breathe. Chapter 7. What the Rain Left Behind. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. From the narrow slit of the cell's high window, Julia could hear it, a steady percussion, like the ticking of time on a broken clock. She sat at the edge of her bunk, holding the drawing of Olivia. The paper had started to curl at the edges, worn from too many fingers and too many nights of staring. She whispered, she was afraid of thunder. Outside the prison walls, a modest house. Detective Ethan Vaughn stepped into a dimly lit kitchen, the floor creaking beneath his boots. The house smelled of old dust, burnt coffee, and something else. Grief left to simmer too long. The man who opened the door was in his 60s, slouched posture, thick glasses, trembling hands. "Mr. Thorne?" Vaughn asked. The man nodded cautiously. "You're the one seeing Julia?" "Yes, I'm a state-assigned psychologist, but I'm also trying to understand what happened." Thorne sat down heavily. He placed a framed photo of Olivia on the table. "She was mine too for a time. Julia was only a teenager when her mother died. I remarried too quickly, and I regret every day that followed." Vaughn watched him carefully. "Did you know about Dr. Dorian?" The old man hesitated. But I knew something wasn't right. Julia stopped talking to me, started sleeping with a knife under her pillow. She'd flinch whenever anyone knocked at the door. Did you try to help? I didn't know how. I let my wife control everything. She hated Julia, thought she was wild, ungrateful." Mr. Thorne swallowed hard. "But the night I found out what she'd done, she came to me, soaked in rain, holding Olivia. She said, 'I did what you should have done,' and I let her go." Vaughn's pen paused. "You helped her disappear?" "I didn't hide her," Thorne said. "I just didn't stop her." Back in the prison, cell 5. The rain grew heavier as night fell. The guards had turned off the lights, but no one in cell 5 was sleeping. Julia sat by the small barred window, watching the streaks of water blur the world outside. "You okay?" Casey whispered from above. Julia didn't answer. Casey climbed down, sat beside her on the cold floor. "I heard they moved your court date again." Julia nodded. "You gonna fight it?" Another silence. Then, "I don't think I deserve to." Casey scoffed. "You think any of us in here got what we deserved?" She reached into her shirt and pulled out a folded paper crane. "Here," she said, placing it in Julia's hand. "You need something that reminds you people can make beauty from pain." Julia held it gently. "Why do you care?" Casey's voice was low, almost a growl. "Because no one cared about me when I needed it. Maybe I don't want to be that person anymore." In the guard's office, a leak in the roof, water pooled in the corner. A guard placed a bucket under it and cursed. Outside, in the evidence room, a single file was slid into a bin marked inactive. Julia Ross, homicide, awaiting sentencing. No mention of the broken system. No mention of the monster in a white coat. Just a name, a label, and silence. Chapter 8. The Visitor. The morning came cold and gray. Julia Ross was eating slowly. If you could call pushing mashed oats around a tray eating. When the voice came through the intercom. "Inmate 3969, you have a visitor." She froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Casey looked up from her tray across the table. "You expecting anyone?" Julia shook her head. "No one visits me." Casey smirked. "Well, someone broke tradition." Visitation room. The guard uncuffed Julia just enough for her to sit across the plexiglass divider. Her heart thudded as the door on the opposite end opened. and in walked her father. Mr. Thorne looked thinner than before. His hair was fully gray now. A wool coat hung off his frame like it didn't quite belong to him. But it was the eyes, the same ones Julia had inherited, that gave him away, heavy with regret. He sat down slowly, no words at first. Julia leaned back, arms crossed, trying to fortify herself. "Why are you here?" I I heard they moved your sentencing up. So? So I thought maybe you'd want someone here." "I don't," she said flatly. "I'm not a child anymore." "No," he whispered. "But you were, once. And I wasn't there." Julia flinched. "Don't start this now." "I should have listened when you said you didn't feel safe," he said, barely audible. "I should have believed you when you said she hated you." Julia's eyes narrowed. "You chose her." "I was afraid. Afraid of losing you both." "You lost me anyway," he nodded. "I know." There was a long silence. Then Julia said, "You still don't know what she did, do you?" He looked up. "I have ideas, but I don't know everything." "Good. Let it stay that way. Some things are too ugly for memory." The guard cleared her throat. "2 minutes." Mr. Thorne reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it into the slot under the glass. "I found this in Olivia's room. I think she made it for you before everything happened." Julia hesitated, then took the paper. It was a child's drawing. Wobbly crayon lines of a house, a big sun, and 2 stick figures. One labeled me, the other Mommy. Beneath it, in blocky handwriting, "I'm not scared when you're with me." Julia bit her lip hard, her eyes stinging. The guard called time. As she stood to leave, Mr. Thorne said softly, "Julia, I'm proud of you. For surviving." Back in the cell, Julia sat on her bunk for a long time, the drawing cradled in her hands like a glass artifact. Across from her, Casey whispered, "You okay?" Julia didn't answer. Instead, she carefully folded the paper and slid it between the pages of her notebook. Later that night, she added a new entry. "He came today. My father. I thought I'd hate him more than I did. But grief has its own rules. It folds into you like fog, and you don't notice how heavy it is until someone tries to lift it. Maybe I needed to see him one more time." She paused. "Maybe I needed someone to see me." Chapter 9. The Verdict. The courtroom felt colder than any cell Julia Ross had been in. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of strangers who had come to witness justice, or maybe just spectacle. Julia stood alone in the defendant's box. Orange jumpsuit, shackled hands, a face more tired than terrified. Across the aisle, the parents of Dr. Dorian sat stiffly. The mother held a folded tissue in her hand, but her eyes were dry. The father never looked up from his lap. Behind them, Julia's father sat quietly, coat folded over his knees, the drawing from Olivia tucked safely in his inner pocket. At the bench, the judge adjusted his glasses. "This court has reviewed the testimony," he said, "the psychiatric evaluations, the evidence presented by both the prosecution and the defense." Julia's attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Meredith, had tried her best. She argued trauma. She argued motive. She argued Julia had been let down by every adult in her life. But arguments only went so far. The jury foreman rose. "In the case of the people versus Julia Ross," Julia inhaled, "we find the defendant guilty on both counts of voluntary manslaughter." No gasp, no tears, just the sound of a gavel cracking like bone. Later, holding room. Ethan Vaughn leaned against the wall, his hands clenched behind him. Julia sat on a bench, staring at the floor. "They didn't sentence you to death," he said quietly. "That matters." "I still lost," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. You told the truth. You gave your daughter a voice when no one else would. That's not losing. Julia looked at him, really looked. I didn't think I'd make it this far. You did. And now what? You live. She laughed once, dry, bitter. In prison? Yes, but alive. Which means one day, Olivia might find the truth, might understand. Julia's eyes shimmered. Will she hate me? I don't think so, Ethan said. I think she'll see the world tried to bury you, and you crawled out anyway. He took something from his coat pocket, her notebook. I thought you'd want this back. Julia ran her fingers over the cover like it was made of porcelain. Thank you, she said, then added quietly, for seeing me. Chapter 10. The Death of a Love. Finale. 3 years later. The prison hadn't changed, not the cold walls, not the rhythmic sound of boots on concrete, not the scent of disinfectant clinging to every surface. But Julia Ross had. Her hair was longer now. Threads of silver glinted in the overhead light. There was still a scar under her right eye from a fight in her second year, but her posture had shifted. She walked straighter, spoke less, but when she did, her voice carried weight. She was no longer invisible. She had become someone. Morning in cell block 5. It was quiet during early chores. Julia was folding blankets when a guard approached her. Visitor, she said. Julia blinked. Today's not scheduled. The guard shrugged. He pulled strings, said it was important. Visitation room. When she stepped inside, Ethan Vaughn was already there, older. A few more lines on his face, a light beard now. But the same eyes, clear, steady. Julia sat. He slid an envelope across the table. She sent this. Julia's heart skipped. Her hands trembled as she opened the flap. Inside, a drawing. Crayon on cardstock, a tree, a sun, and a figure with short hair standing under the words, "To Mommy, I'm not scared anymore." Julia closed her eyes. She's with a foster family now, Ethan said gently. They send updates. She's healthy, curious, a little defiant. Julia chuckled through the tears. Good. She'll be old enough to choose when she wants to reach out. When that happens, she'll know the truth. I've made sure of it. Julia nodded slowly. I thought love had died the day I killed him. But maybe that wasn't the death of love. Ethan looked at her, waiting. She whispered, maybe love died the day I stopped believing I deserved it. He leaned forward. And maybe it was reborn the day you chose to protect someone else, no matter the cost. Their eyes met. And in that moment, through plexiglass, through years of pain, something passed between them. Not romance. Something quieter. Respect. Recognition. Peace. Back in her cell. That night, Julia opened her notebook. It was nearly full now. Pages and pages of drawings, journal entries, letters to a daughter who would one day read them all. On the last page, she wrote, there was once a version of me who thought love was gentle, soft, and always kind. But I've learned love is also sharp, brutal, unrelenting, willing to bleed, willing to burn. The death of a love wasn't when I took a life. It was when I let fear speak louder than truth. But here I am, still breathing, still writing. And that, too, is a kind of love. She folded the letter, slid it into a fresh envelope, and labeled it simply, for Olivia. One day. The rain started again, just as the lights dimmed. Julia closed her eyes and let it sing her to sleep.